This is why we don't have election results on election night. Election day came and went, and even after a couple of days, we still don't have a definitive winner in the race for the White House. But why is that? Is it all a left conspiracy that is undermining our democracy? A tight race that requires extra care when it comes to counting votes for mail-in ballots? Or is it just another attack on our nerves of an already devastating 2020? While our country's future hangs in the balance and the president is contesting multiple states' irregular procedures in processing and counting votes, every American around the world is holding their breath for such electoral anxiety. Join us in today's video as we explain why we still don't have the results of the presidential race and why there are still several states where vote counting is still projected to extend for days and maybe even weeks. We'll also revisit how the Electoral College works and why Biden may not win the election even though, so far, he is the candidate that has received more popular votes for the presidency in US history. So make sure to turn up the volume on your headset and get comfortable, because we're about to begin. But before we do, if you're new to our channel, take a moment to give us a like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more upcoming videos. Here is some quick background information on the 2020 US election. For months, analysts have been predicting what may ultimately end up happening, that there would be a delay in this year's election results, and the reason is none other than public enemy number one, the coronavirus. Fear of standing in long lines for several hours surrounded by potentially infectious voters, turning the election into a nationwide superspreader event, pushed millions of voters to cast in their votes early through mail and at ballot drop-off boxes. An amazing turnout of over 100 million voters across America voted early, and all those votes have to be counted. The real problem is how and when these votes are accepted and actually counted depends on each state's legislature. We'll get back to that in a minute, and we'll also see which are the culprit states that are keeping us in an unprecedented cliffhanger. But first, let's see what is the difference between early, mail-in, and election day votes and how they're counted. Why are mail-in ballots harder to count than regular votes? So, to recap, there was way more voting by mail this year than in any other election in US history. In fact, 2 out of 3 votes were made early. In some places like Pennsylvania, the increase was over 10-fold of what it had in 2016. This in itself wouldn't be a problem if not for the fact that counting mail-in votes is a lot harder and more time-consuming than regular election day votes. The entire process behind mail-in ballots is much more complex than showing up and casting our vote at the polling site. First of all, in most states, you need to request an absentee mail-in ballot in order to cast your vote early, while 5 states, including Nevada, automatically sent mail-in ballots to all registered voters. Once we receive our ballot, we have to fill it out to cast our votes like we normally would on election day. But then we need to follow a very precise set of instructions to put our vote in a special envelope. We have to fill out that envelope, carefully sign it, date it, and finally drop it off by a deadline set by each state in one of the many ballot drop-off boxes across the country for the US Postal Service to deliver them to each precinct. You could also choose to take it there yourself, or you could even take it to your polling center on election day if you don't trust the Postal Service doing it on time. Once they are received, ballots have to undergo a verification process to ensure that there is no cheating or fraud involved and that voters' anonymity is maintained. Each step takes time, and doing so for millions of votes is a behemoth of a task. Poll workers have to 1. Open the envelopes, 2. Check the voter's name and personal data and cross-check it on the registry, 3. Check that the signature on the envelope corresponds to the registered signature of the voter. If the first poll worker has any doubt about that, then it passes to a second-level worker who has some forensic training who can check it more closely. And if they can't decide if it's legit or not, then it'll pass on to a spot checker. 4. Then the total number of ballots have to be counted. After this last step, the vote on each ballot is counted and tabulated in exactly the same way as any other regular vote. And here's where things get tricky for this year's election, as you're about to find out. Early count and election day count. The fact that there were over 100 million votes cast early might make most think, hey, that's great! That means we'll have to count less votes on election night, so we should have the results even sooner, right? Well, this may be true in some states, but in others, not exactly. While most states allow early counting of mail-in votes, or at least they allow opening and verifying voters' ID and signature and counting the total number of ballots before Election Day, there are some states in which not a single envelope can be opened until Election Day arrives. What does that mean? It means that poll workers end up having 20 times more work than they would have otherwise, and there's no way that they can open, verify, organize, classify, and finally count so many mail-in votes in one day. And that's not counting the regular votes. That's the big holdup. So no matter what some may say, there's nothing strange about it taking longer. The second culprit. Some states keep receiving ballots days after Election Day, while residents in other states received multiple ballots before Election Day. This is the second most important cause of delay in some states. While in most places mail-in votes can only be counted if they arrive at the precinct on or before Election Day, some states, like Nevada, which is one of the big battlegrounds so far, only require mail-in votes to be postmarked by November 3rd, but they can actually come in as late as November 10th. So if it's a close call on that state, it could be a week before we see a final, irreversible result, especially considering that it takes time to count those votes after they actually arrive. Another one of the key states for this election, North Carolina, also has the same extended deadline thanks to a ruling granted by the Supreme Court. There are also votes to be counted from our overseas military personnel and American citizens living in other countries around the world. And in an election year where many states are showing very narrow gaps between two candidates' votes, every vote counts. But in order to include tons of inbound pouring votes as received on time under the law, some post offices were backdating postmarks to make up their own inefficiency of delivering ballots on time. Do you think that's a justified action to take by the post office supervisors? Leave your comments below. While there are likely votes from citizens of both parties, but cities and states are known to be leaning one party or the other, and therefore making a difference in the overall outcome. This is why we see both sides of supporters complaining and protesting depending on what cities and states people live in. Another problem is that people received multiple ballots in some states and were told to only mail in the latest ballot received due to printing errors on previous ballots. This is when workers have to spend extra time sorting through duplicate ballots from voters that potentially double or triple voted. We can only hope that they did spend the time sorting through when computers couldn't catch the duplicates from the same voters. We certainly hope that the extra time needed right now is truly being spent on validating duplicates. Even after the count is officially verified and finished, we still won't have an official result. The last but in no way least reason why we still don't have a final official result and why we won't have it for several more days or even weeks is that the count must be certified. But we have to remember that the numbers and winners of each state that we've been seeing on the news every day since Election Day are only projections that the news media makes based on running numbers, exit polls, and mathematical models. So even if you see electoral numbers like Biden 253 and Trump 214, that can ultimately change once the count is actually finished. Additionally, even after counties finish counting the votes, they still have to submit them to each state so that they can check that the count is legit and verify the results. Only then will we have our definitive answer as to who will be working in the Oval Office for the next 4 years. What happens if nobody wins the election? An important feature of the American Electoral College system is that it is possible for there to be a tie of 269 electoral votes, in which case no one would be the winner. If this happens, and it has happened thrice in the past, there is a provision in Article 2 of the Constitution called a contingent election, in which the President and/or Vice President of the United States would be elected by Congress. While it used to be the outgoing Congress that made the election, since 1933 it became the incoming Congress's job to do so. In a contingent election, the President is chosen by the House of Representatives, while the Vice President is elected by the Senate. The Senate race in the current election is still undecided, even more so than the presidency, but the House is seemingly already blue at the time of this video, which means that if this scenario were to play out, Joe Biden would most likely be elected president. On the other hand, if there is a tie between Kamala Harris and Vice President Pence, if things keep going as they are now, it'll be Pence who will become Biden's VP. Wouldn't that be weird? So now that you understand why we don't have a final result yet, do you feel more at ease? Or are you just as anxious as you were before? Legal or not, do you think that it's fair that late votes can be counted if they are postmarked within the allowed deadline? Leave a comment down below and join the discussion. While you're at it, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell for future videos.